I received this TIG MMA 160 amps from ToolMania, and we're going to check on how good or how bad it is. But before we do that, let's have a look what's in the package. And in the package, of course, you got the TIG. It's 160 amps, as I said before, but it does stick welding and TIG welding. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. It comes with a strap, so you can actually put the strap up and then carry it around, which is it's pretty handy. Then it has two cables with it for MMA welding. You got your ground cable or your clamp, and I think this is not all that good. It's pretty short as well, as you can see, but it has a reasonable thickness. The cable feels all right, but the clamp itself, I'm missing some pretty good quality contacts on here. It looks more like a battery clamp to me. I probably wouldn't be using this clamp. I would probably change it. But then again, this is a small TIG. The second cable that comes with it is the torch or the holder for the stick welding. Now that feels quite good, and it has copper inside, so a different groove, so it can hold the stick pretty well. So I think this is all right. The next part that comes with it is, of course, the most important part, because you went for a TIG welder and I didn't go for an MMA, but the MMA comes with it for free. This is the big cable for the TIG welding, and that's this cable right here with the torch. And we'll look closer onto that in a minute. And that's a pretty long one, so that's good. It has a connector for the gas, and it has also a connector for the switch, so it will generate power or not. And we'll have a look at this in a few seconds. So I think overall the TIG cable isn't too bad. It feels all right. Let's see if we get a closer look up and if we try it out how good it is. And then it comes with a shield, a welding shield. And now this is a joke, guys. I'm sorry. I think this is just an add-on. It's very flimsy and it's totally useless for TIG welding. At best, you could use it for MMA welding or stick welding, like so. But then again, it's so clumsy, so cheap. No, I think they just threw it in the package. It's a freebie, so get rid of it. But instead, order yourself a decent automatic welding helmet. This is great because you're going to need your two hands for TIG welding. So go for that. Go for a decent, good quality automatic helmet from ToolMania. That's quite good. I tried this one, and you can set it for different sensitivities, different purposes. It's fast switching, really good stuff. So it's not part of the package, but I would really recommend that you go for this because it makes a hell of a difference and you can't use the other one. All right, and then finally you got a pouch. This is the pouch that comes with it, and in the pouch you find some parts. You find some cups. These are TIG cups. And they come in different sizes, and you're going to need cups because the cup is going to hold the gas together around the tungsten rod. You also got a tungsten rod. There's only one in the package, but that's good enough to start with. And then you have some holders for the tungsten rod, and then of course you got the tail on the torch. Remember that welding with TIG requires you to weld with argon. Typically I'm using 95% of argon and 5% of carbon dioxide. But that's something you need to add yourself. That doesn't come with the kit. And of course, I forgot to mention, there's also an instruction manual that comes with it. Sometimes the English is a bit difficult reading. I think it's kind of a direct translation, and you can figure it out for yourself. But these devices are so simple, so that is not an issue. So let's have a closer look on some of the parts now. So here is the TIG MMA 160, able to deliver 160 amps. On the right hand side, you've got a knob which is controlling the amount of power you're going to need to weld with. So it goes between 10 amps and 160 amps. On the left, you got a warning light for over temperature. So if you were welding for a long time and it may overheat at maximum power, it has a self-protection on it, so the light will come on, it will shut off, and then you have to let it cool down, and then you can continue again. And then of course you also have the switch here. This switch toggles you between TIG and MMA welding. If you place it on TIG, you will have to use, of course, this connector and the switch connector. Down this switch connector, you can also connect the foot pedal, but in this case, the switch is on the torch itself, and you will have to connect the clamp. If you move it to MMA welding or stick welding, then you're going to have to use the two outer connectors. And that's all there is in terms of control. There is no gas flow control on this one. It's all built in. It's all kind of semi-automatic, so there's nothing else you can do with this. The other thing you need to watch out for with this welder is that this is only an HF arc start welder, meaning that you cannot scratch, that you cannot do touch and lift start methods for the arc. You just have to bring down the tip of the tungsten rod close enough to the metal. Don't touch the metal, and then pull the switch or push the switch, and then the arc will jump over because it's using high frequency. Now be careful with this welder because it's using high frequency for arc start. You must be careful with modern cars and electronics because it can have an influence on the electronics on the car. So always disconnect things before you start welding on a car with this. Now let's have a look on the back, what we have in the back. In the back there is not much more. It has a very good and decent power cable. Very strong and thick, so this is really good. And you have a power and on and off switch, and of course you have an input for the gas and an extra grounding. So here you need to connect the gas. This TIG is a MMA inverter type built with IGBT technology, and that's important because you will see some advertisements on the internet where people talk about a MOS-based inverter with IGBT technology, and that is just basically not possible. You can't have the two in one machine, but that will become far more clear once we have gone through this. But first of all, let us have a look inside this TIG, how it looks at the inside, how it's built, and what the quality is, because I'm really curious about that. I already undid the screws, not that I encourage you to open that up, but I still want to see it and share it with you. The first thing that you notice is when you open up this device is that it's packed with electronics. And the quality is very good. Even the circuit boards are of great quality. They are not the flaky cardboard types, but they are the epoxy type. So this is really good. Soldering looks all right. It looks like well done. So overall, I think this quality is quite acceptable and quite good. Now what you see right here, these are the IGBT transistors. So the isolated gate bipolar transistors. And those are the ones that are going to do the switching. That is very important. Cheaper models, they have MOSFETs, and other models, they may even have SCRs, which is even an older type based on thyristors. On this side, you will find the transformer, which is now a lot smaller than what you would have on a normal transformer type welder, because this is a inverter model. Now, we're not going to get further deeper into all this because this is not an electronics course at all, but it's important that I showed you that because now you might better understand on how all this is working together. And therefore, I have a little schematic for you, very simple, and I'll take you through it because it is important to understand on how your TIG is working. This is a logical diagram of the TIG, and on the left hand side you have your 220 volts AC input. This is your connection to your power grid. The 220 volt AC, which is a sine wave, is then rectified inside the inverter with a set of diodes, and what comes out of it is a regulated direct current. Now the direct current is then fed to a switching matrix, and the switching matrix is controlled by a power amp selector. This is the button or the knob that you have in the front bezel of your welder, so you can set the amperage. Now depending on the setting, this switch will close and open faster or slower, and depending on that rate you're going to create more or less pulses on the output. So basically the DC voltage, which is a steady voltage and current, will be chopped up into pulses, and that's why we call this pulse width modulation. And again, the size of the pulses will vary depending on the setting of the selector in the front of the welder, and that's how you control the power. Now that pulse signal is then fed through a transformer on the primary, and it will cause an induction to the secondary, and the output of the secondary is then fed to another diode stack for rectification, and then one side is going to your clamp for welding, while the other side of that rectified DC signal is going to the torch. On this specific welder you have an additional element which is called the high frequency arc start circuitry. It's this one. So a high frequency is superimposed on the DC to start the arc. This is the only method that this welder can work. There's other types. There is the touch and lift, and there's the scratch method, but this welder is only HF or high frequency. Now let us come back to the switching area, because that's the most important part. It is well known that transformers are far more efficient at high frequencies. So they can become a lot smaller at very high frequencies. And therefore it's important that we can have fast switching and high power switching. And this switching matrix is what does that for you. And that is typically built out of different technologies, all semiconductors. We've got the standard MOSFET, metal oxide semiconductor field effect transistor, which is one technology, really great for high frequency, but not as good for high power. Then you have the IGBT, the insulated gate bipolar transistor, which is double isolated, and this one is very specifically developed for high power switching. And then you have others like the silicon rectifier, the SCRs, like the thyristors. This is a bit older, but not used in this device. Now the device we're looking at from ToolMania is using IGBT. That is the best technology you can have for switching matrices. Because it can deal with high currents, it's going to develop far less heat. MOSFET is not designed for high current, and if it was fitted with MOSFET devices, you would see that they would heat up faster at high current continuous welding, and therefore they may cut out because of the thermic protection. With IGBT, you're not going to have that issue. So if you're looking for a welder, try to look for an IGBT welder or a plasma cutter or whatever. An inverter with IGBT is probably the better choice. And this specific welder is an IGBT welder. This is the torch, and the torch has a long cable going all the way back to the TIG welder. And this connector right here connects to the front of the TIG welder. That's where the gas is coming in actually. Whereas this connector is the power start connector. So only when the contact is closed you can start, and you also need to connect this to the front of the TIG, but we'll do that in a few seconds. On the torch itself you find the switch, and I think it's a bit weird because they tied it up with tie wraps. I am not too hot on that, but I think one of the things on that one is because it's tie wraps and it looks a bit clumsy, it has a big advantage because you can actually remove it, the switch, and use a pedal switch if you have one. Because a lot of TIG welders are using a foot switch or a pedal switch on the floor. So you could clip this and then just connect a pedal switch to the front of the TIG welder. So that's a good thing. So although something looks very weird initially, at the end it looks very good. One thing I noticed is that the torch itself is rated to up to 150 amps, where the actual TIG welder is 160. So maybe that's a little bit short, but then again, we're not going to weld at 160 amps with this kind of a small TIG welder. Right, now of course, like this you can't use this. Here you've got the tungsten rod. It's very special material. This is the electrode, and this is a non-consumable. In other words, when you're welding, this is not going to be consumed at all. It's going to have wear and tear, so you may have to sharpen the tip every so often. So you should get a small grinder and only use it for grinding the tip. And I'll show you that in a few minutes, what I'm using for that. And then of course you've got the holders, and then you have the cups, different cups. Now the cups here are all of the same size, but typically you can get different sizes of cups. And the cup is there to make sure that the gas that comes out of the torch surrounds the tip of the tungsten, so it maintains the arc. So the gas is there to maintain arc stability and penetration. Now obviously we have to mount the stick into the torch, and for that you need to undo this. There we go. Then get the tungsten rod, one of those holders, slide it through, but find the right size one, because I think there's different sizes on them. Whoops. Get the right size one, fit it in there, and then lock that up. Now, the question is always, how far should the tip stick out? Now, I'm typically going for about a centimeter or 3/4 of a centimeter of tip, and then just lock it. And now basically your torch is kind of ready for welding. So if you're going to weld, you're going to hold it close to the metal, but don't touch the metal, okay? Because if you do touch the metal, then you're going to spoil the tip, and then you have to grind it. And then push the switch and the arc should jump over. I'm very curious to see on how this is going to work on this device. Welding with the TIG will require you to sharpen every so often the tungsten rod. Although it's not a consumable, it will have wear and tear on the tip. And then you must sharpen that tip. That is very important. And sharpening the tip is best done on a small mill, a small grinder, and you only use it to sharpen your tungsten rods, because otherwise you're going to spoil the rod by metal parts that could be on the grinding stone. So let's grind this, and you're going to grind this a bit like a pencil. Now once you've got this nice tip, this nice cone, now you're ready to start welding again with your TIG. When we first looked on all the parts that come with the kit, we looked at the ground clamp, and this is the one that comes with this TIG. And you can see there is no copper inside, there's no connection between the two sides. And if you compare it with this one, you can see the copper parts and the connection in between them. Now this is a proper clamp, this is not. This is something from a car battery or a jump start or something like that. So I would not use this clamp. But the good thing is that both are having the same connector. So in other words, if you have a good quality clamp, you can hook it up to the same socket, because look, they are exactly the same. So that's a good thing. Before you can start welding with your TIG, you're going to need some additional parts. You're going to need filler material. This is the filler material. These are kind of rods that you need to add to the welding puddle, and they come in different thicknesses and different materials, so it all depends what you're welding. So I'm not going to start talking about all that, but you need to buy that all separately. And you also might need to have a set of tungsten rods of different types and different thicknesses, and they have different purposes. They have different materials added to the tungsten and so on. But keep that in mind, that you may have to buy all these extra things before you can actually start welding with your TIG. The second important part on your TIG is the gas. You will have to get gas, and that's separate from the TIG. Now I'm using argon for 95% and 5% carbon dioxide. This is the mix I use, which is great for welding, because the carbon dioxide assures me good penetration, whereas the argon preserves my arc stability. Now if you're going to weld aluminum, of course, you can go for 100% argon. There's different mixes on the market for different products, for different welding techniques, but this is what I use. Now once you've got the bottle, you also have to buy the pressure control system. These are the two dials that you have here. So on one dial you can actually see how much gas you still have in the bottle, and on the other one you regulate the flow of gas. So you have to set the amount of liters per minute. Now for this kind of small welder, I think it's between 5 to 7 liters per minute, but it's in the manual, you can check it out. So let us hook up the gas to the TIG welder, and then we probably could start welding. Let's open up the gas bottle. So let's turn on the unit in the back and see what happens. And it starts up immediately. And we got an indication here that we have no current flowing. And here you adjust the current. As you can see, we're now going up to about 164 amps. Of course, we are not welding at this moment in time. So I'm going to set it to about 45, 50. I think this is about right for the kind of metal we're going to weld. And I'm going to place it on, of course, TIG, because that's the first thing we're going to do. And now we're going to hook up the torch. There we go. And this bolt, you want to tighten this down with a spanner, because you don't want any gas leaking, right? But don't tighten it too tight. And we're going to hook up the better ground clamp, and as I said before, the connector will fit, and you'll see that in a second that it does fit. There we go. So that's the good side of it. So let's see if we can pull a weld, and I'm going to hold the torch fairly close to the surface but not touching it, and then depress the switch, and hopefully the arc will jump over. So this is starting pretty good. And that is welding very nice. Just going to continue a bit here. And I'm welding at around 65 amps, guys. Oh, that was me. What you noticed was there was a lot of sparks flying around, and that's because I didn't have enough gas. So now let's do that again with more gas. See, now the sparks are gone. And this is welding quite nice. So now let's weld the thicker piece. I'm going to set it to about, well, let's say 90. 3.5 mil piece of metal, and see how that goes. Now TIG welding, guys, is the most difficult part for welding. It's something you really need to get used to. But this works very well. Now we're going to try to weld very thin material. This is the metal bars that you use to put drywall up. And this is very thin. It's not even 0.5 mil. I think it's even less than that. So let's give that a try and see how good it goes. I've set the TIG to about 15 amps. Yeah, that even works well. Oh, I touched it. Let's see. Yeah, this works very nice. Oops. It's a very thin weld, but it works like a champ. The arc ignites very nicely. And that works quite well as well. So all by all, this is working pretty well. And this is very thin material, guys, so I like that. All by all, this is working very well. The TIG is handy, it's light, the arc jumps very quickly, and it's consistent. So I'm quite happy with this. I was welding thick and thin material. My welds were not always very perfect, but then again, I'm not an experienced TIG welder. I've been welding with TIG before, but it takes a while to get really used to it. And if you buy a new TIG, keep that in mind, that you will have to try out quite a few times to place a good weld. But once you master the movement, then you will be so happy with it, because TIG welding is like artwork. So all by all, this 160 MMA TIG from ToolMania is a pretty good tool for its price. Now, we still have to do one more thing. We're going to do some stick welding with it, because that's what it also does. So let us get a piece of thicker material and we do some stick welding. So now we're going to try to weld with the stick, and we're going to weld 3mm thick steel, and I'm using a 2.6 mil stick for that. I've set the welder to about 90 amps, and we'll see how that goes. Yeah, that's a pretty nice weld. So we're gonna weld the second one now with a bit less power and see how that goes. So MMA welding worked out pretty well. I will do one more in the middle here at full power. Oh, this is good. Now, of course, that's too much power for that panel. So, but still, it is good. To conclude, this stick is working pretty well. It's 160 amps, easy to adjust. easy to use, very few controls, but it works fine. It welds well in TIG, in thick and thick panels. It works fine on MMA. Really a good tool. Now, there's two negative sides, if I can call them negative, of course, on this one. The first one is that little handheld screen for MMA welding. Toss that away, that is useless. And in fact, you need a proper helmet anyway for TIG welding, so go for an automatic helmet. I use the ToolMania automatic helmet, this one right here, and this is a great helmet. It's very comfortable, adjustable, and it's very fast in triggering on and off once you start welding, and you can adjust the sensitivity. So if you're buying a TIG like this one, consider buying also an automatic helmet, because it is worthwhile the investment. And the other thing I would probably change on this TIG is the clamp that goes on the workpiece. That is a bit clumsy, I think. It's not the right clamp for that, but you can change it with any other one. And then initially I thought as well that the switch on the torch was a bit awkward because it's tied down with tie wraps, but I found it to be very handy actually. And the good thing is I can cut it loose and use a foot pedal. And that's it, guys. Bye bye. And I hope you enjoy your TIG as much as I do enjoy mine.